system on thought. Military science fiction podcast. Untold stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction podcast.
Today we're talking about endings to.
It would make a good show, though.
I know.
I feel like I need a baseball cap since everybody else has one
You gotta
on.
join the
There you
club,
go.
man.
Yeah.
You still have hair, so you can show it off while you got it.
Josh
It's
has
actually
it.
pretty funny because I normally always wear a cap,
Mhm.
and I went to a volleyball game last year sometime with my kid, and I didn't wear one, and I didn't think anything of it until one of the dads was like, "There's something different about you today," and I'm like, I don't know what it is. He's looking at me, and he's looking at me, and he goes, "You're not wearing a hat today," and I'm like, "Huh, so I'm that guy." All right,
Hat guy.
I embrace it.
Well, when it comes to video recording, like the glare off my head messes with the lighting, so I gotta mute that somehow.
That's why I had to adjust my key light because then I was like in the shadow, like Alec Baldwin.
There you go.
Oh my God, I haven't thought about that movie for a long time.
I was wondering if anybody was going to get the reference.
I got it. I was just
You
like
remember The Phantom?
yeah,
Yes.
Billy Zane?
Yeah.
the purple suit.
Yep.
All right. So we have talked about this is kind of the end of a progression for us where we started with okay, you've received, you're going to start a series, you're going from grand concept, working that out to an outline. You are developing a chapter outline and what that looks like and what the various kind of methods we like to use for that. And now we're talking about the ending. And endings will really make or break the experience for a reader. And one of the things that I always find very interesting is people talk about how long a book should be, right? And sometimes you could have a book that is 80,000 words or on the short side of what we consider, at least for, MILSF, and people will be fine with it. Like nobody will mention the length of the story because everything wrapped up in a satisfying way. Or you could have a book that, contrary to that is like 120,000 words, but for whatever reason, it just goes, and then stops because the way it was planned basically wasn't as a whole arc, but as probably the first part of an ongoing story. And that just makes readers angry. And you'll see that in the reviews on the book. So it's an important thing to think about. A lot of people say you should start with the ending and know exactly where you're going. Some people we've talked about pantsing and part of the allure for them is not knowing where things are going. But like always, we're fortunate to have Rick with us who has done this a lot. So Rick, why don't you kick things off on what you think about endings and how you approach an ending?
Well, the ending for a book and the ending for a series are two very different things. But for a book, see what you're talking about, where people do 120,000 words and they stop and they're just setting up for the next book. I don't like that, and I have never appreciated even people who are writing long series who don't give satisfying endings to the particular book they're writing. I mean, you can have a cliffhanger and yet still wrap up the story arc of the book you're in. I feel like if you do not at least bring to a satisfying conclusion the personal story of the main characters, then people are going to feel disappointed at your book. I mean, you can leave plot threads hanging for the larger, like just to use Star Wars as an example, at the end of the first movie, the Star Wars 1, not 4, the Empire was still out there. They had lost the Death Star, but Vader was still alive. The Empire was still out there. There was still stories left to tell, but they wrapped up the story that started in that movie. So I feel like you can wrap up the arc you started in your book and yet still leave a lot of room for the next one in the series. And it bugs me when I read authors who don't wrap up the arc they started. Instead, they have continued in the next book and they leave you hanging on all of it. Like nothing is concluded, nothing is settled. There's no kind of closure for that particular book. I think it's very possible to write. I mean, I wrote a long series, and I don't know, maybe towards book 13 or 14, it got to the point where they weren't as much closure as it used to be. But I try to close every individual plot in a book instead of leaving it for
Yeah,
the series.
I think that comes down to the syndrome's not the right word, but the idea of the trap that a lot of newer authors fall into, myself included, where you have an idea and it's the best idea you've ever had, and this is going to be the idea for your series, but you don't, that it's just one idea. And how many people have we seen that have said, "Oh, I've got a 27 book series I'm planning." Right? Well, how many ideas is that series? Right? It's like their one idea that they're writing 27 books on, and they haven't considered the endings or the breakpoints between the books, likely. And if you have a series idea, you're thinking of almost everything pushing to that, whatever that series idea is, the conclusion of that series. And you don't give a lot of thought to the book breaks or the sequence breaks of the books that carry you there. And so you get, kind of a lackluster, maybe a cliffhanger, or, you discover some new thing that puts you into the next book, but you're still progressing towards that one idea. And the thing about the thing that I really try to do with that idea is have that one great idea be the you've got to have multiple great ideas is what I'm trying to say. You've got to have if for each book in a series, you have to have
What
a
if you only
great
have one
idea
great
that you're
idea?
talking about. Right. One idea does not make a series. It doesn't even make a book. You've got to have good ideas
My
for books too.
If I could give one advice to anybody who's trying to write not just this genre, but any genre book, every cool thing that you think of that you want to put in a series, try to just put that all in the first book and count
100%.
on your imagination and your, wit and intelligence to come up with something for the next book. Don't
Right.
try to drag it out.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, we all have those notebooks or those files on our computer that are just ideas, random ideas. I've got on my phone, I've got book ideas that I will never get to write just because I think of them just randomly and write them down. So you're never going to be out of them. And if you're, let's call it a trilogy, if you're writing a trilogy and you've got one good idea for that trilogy and you don't end the first book well, there's nothing saying that anybody is going to go on to the next book to read book two or even to book three to get to that idea, right? You're like, I got to
My
drag
in
this
my
out.
Samsung Notes file, I have like you can't really see it because the screen is, but
Oh,
uh,
there you go.
there's all these little notes that I come up with an idea for a book or a title or character and just put it in there, and I have like hundreds of them by now.
Hmm.
I try to really focus on what Rick was talking about as having a good, satisfying ending for each book, and that each book has to wrap up some kind of an arc. Like for instance, Weaponized. It's a trilogy. Now this is a kind of a different trilogy because there's not a huge kind of series spanning arc to it. But every book deals with more or less one specific thing. Now, in that thing, in that umbrella of that one thing, there's multiple things that they've got to do. But the first book is centered around them getting off this arena battleship deal, or it's kind of a slave thing, and they've got to get off of that. And then the second book, they've got to find the person that put them there. And those are the small ideas in and of themselves, but you build around that idea. And so when you get to the end of the first book, you're not pushing to another part of the series, you're wrapping that idea up. Now they're off the ship. And how do they do that? And that's one of the things that I mentioned a couple weeks ago on the podcast. I think I have so many conversations. I can't remember if I said it on the show or not. But we were talking about whoever I was talking to, the difference in endings. And if you have a kind of an action thriller, or depending on the story you're telling, your ending could be the how, right? Or it could be the why. And depending on what those things are, really direct how you're going to write that book. Like, they got to get off the ship. It's not a mystery, right? They're not getting out of it and realizing they're on some, alien. What's the oh, what's that movie? The horror movie where they think they're on the ship and they're in deep space, but then it ends up they're not. They got to the planet where they were supposed to go.
I don't know.
Uh, um, Somebody's gonna tell me in the comments. It was a great movie. It took place in this old spaceship that was breaking down, and it was like
Oh,
a
I think I remember
colony.
reading about that, but I didn't watch it.
It was a great movie. It's kind of a horror sci-fi flick, which typically I'm not into. And spoiler alert, when they get out of the ship, they start like ejecting out in these pods, and then it goes to a wide shot, and the ship is sitting on the coast in the water of this planet. They've been there the whole time, and they didn't know that they were there the whole time. So that was, it's a twist or whatever. But if you're not doing that kind of
Pandorum?
a twist, Pandorum, there you go. Yeah,
Oh, never seen it.
Thank
great
Chat
movie.
GPT.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, AI. But if you're not doing that kind of a twist, if you're not doing a why or a reveal or anything like that, it's the how they're doing it. And so my ending is how they get off the ship. Like, what are the things that they have to overcome to get off the ship? And that brings us, I think, a satisfying conclusion to that book. And then the second book is more of a why. Why did they get there, and who put them there? And that will carry through the second book. And I haven't figured out the third book yet.
That's a problem for future Josh.
Yeah, yeah.
I think in MILSF especially, like I generally, at least in action based stories, like I don't like that kind of reveal because A, it means either like the characters knew something they're not sharing with the reader, and I hate that. It's
Yeah,
a thing that they do in visual stuff, like movies and TVs. They just love to have that, ooh, everything's not what you expected. But in a
right.
story like where we're in somebody's head, especially in MILSF, which I think of as being pretty as realistic as you can make it within the laws of the world you've created. Like I want to see them struggling against the thing, the obstacle that's in front of them, the terrain, the equipment, the other people. um and that's what is satisfying for me, is seeing the character with the tools they have overcome the situation that they're in. And one thing I was just thinking about in terms of that resolution, like a lot of times that's going to be some kind of climactic battle, or a thing that quite often as you get through the middle and the build up into the final part of the story, which could be that battle or that operation, or whatever it is the characters have been preparing for this whole time, and now they're up against it, and you want to see them, like, what happens. And maybe they prevail, or maybe they fail, and that's what leads into the next story. But still, that seeing that happen in a way that is satisfying enough to the situation that has been created is what I like to see. And I think that, at least in MilSF and action, like, what you're describing, Josh, like they've been working up the whole time to get through this situation, and that's what we get to see,
Yeah,
which I think is, for me, is the most satisfying, when it comes to this kind of story. Like I don't want to have everything flipped on its head, because it feels kind of lazy to me. Like the writer was like, "Oh, my story isn't as cool as it could have been, so I got to add this other thing to it." You know, like realistically, if the ship was in space and they knew that, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on in that ship that would indicate it's in space. But
right.
yeah, they're not
Unless there's a evil Chat GPT like AI that's hiding it from them.
I know. I
Yeah.
know.
Well, they were dealing with some like they called it like hyperspace sickness or hypersleep sickness or whatever. So they
Yeah.
didn't they didn't have all the knowledge and they didn't know, they just kind of, it was one of those stereotypical wake up and you don't
Mm.
remember kind of thing.
Yeah, I got a Pandorum. I got to check that out. I'll put the link in the.
It's a good flick. It's
Yeah.
who's in it?
2009.
Yeah. Russell, no, that's not right.
Russell, the love muscle.
Russell
I'll,
Crowe.
I'll look it up.
Dennis Quaid. I don't know
Dennis
why I was
Quaid is
thinking
it?
Russell.
Oh, I like
Dennis
Dennis Quaid and Ben Foster are really, really good in that movie.
Okay. When you start, do you have do you have the end fully in mind, or do you want to sort of discover the situation as you go?
So
That
for
depends.
weaponized, sorry, Rick, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Good.
I was going to say for weaponized, I did have the ending for book one because it's a pretty simple ending. And that one of the things that I've realized over the last couple of years of working on this book and then reading, I don't know, 24 thrillers and other genre books is that the ending doesn't have to be like some kind of big in-game uh, culmination of a bunch of things. It just has to be entertaining, and if it's entertaining, then that's great. It could be, it doesn't have to be D-Day. It could be taking one of the bunkers, right? That could be the ending of your book as long as you do it well. And so for weaponized, I knew that they were going to get off the ship. I just didn't know how, right? And part of the genre uh, guidelines that I'm kind of going by right now is the how is what matters. And that is what's interesting, just because the technology and everything else and who they're going against, the how is interesting. So I knew they were getting off. I didn't know how they were going to get off, and so that in the writing process, that's what have been focusing on with with Valor, Edge of Valor. I knew that there was a conspiracy, but I didn't really know what the conspiracy was. And so the Edge of Valor is more of a why, because at the very beginning of the book, we know that some people survived the mission, but we don't know what happened on the mission, and we don't know why the things happened on the mission. So, in terms of like flipping it on its head, I kind of did that, in terms of like who was responsible. And I think my internet's kind of, I'm frozen, but I don't know if you guys can
We
still
can
hear
hear
me.
you.
We can hear you
We
just
can,
Okay, cool.
you're just frozen like this.
right.
Yeah, yeah, I noticed that.
Send the
Um,
information.
it should cycle. I've got a AT&T. I've got to reposition my routers. But anyway, in Valor, it was more of a why than a how. Just
You
in
need to
terms
reverse
of,
your polarity.
yeah, exactly. And that I didn't know why. I just knew that there was some kind of why. And so while I was writing it, that why came to me. Um, and kind of tied everything together. Of course, it was the ending of that book changed a lot because I wrote it as a standalone, not as the beginning to a trilogy. And so I had to figure out how to twist it into a trilogy. But that's another example of how my one big idea became that one book. And then I thought of other ideas to carry the story on. Because I could have just made the why the series arc, but I didn't think that that would be very fulfilling at the end of the first book. If the whole book is based on the why, and then we get to the end of the book and we don't learn the why, then there's no point for that book.
The
People
end
are
of
going
the
to be
book, it's
mad.
why not?
Right, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think my outlook on that was kind of influenced by the fact that when I first started writing for publication, um, I was trying to get trad published, and back then you didn't like write a trilogy or a series of books. You wrote a book, that had to close up at the end of it. But I also wanted it to have um, expandability, I guess is the word I'm looking for, where if
Right.
things went well, I could write more. So I left things open ended at the end of it, and but as far as like having an idea for the end of the book when I start it, yes. For the end of the series, usually no.
Yeah, good
When I
point.
start a series, I do not. Sometimes I don't even have an idea for book two. I write book one, and I when I get to the end of book one, I'm like, okay, what does this leave open for me? You know,
Mhm.
what avenues does this leave open to progress? And I'll do it that way. It's not always. Uh, I mean, there have been series that I started with an idea of having a three book arc and finishing it up in three books and then moving on to something else that I still didn't have any idea what the like this Archangel series I'm writing right now. Um, I had an idea for a three book story arc for this series, and I'm going to write those three books and hopefully get to the end of that arc and then have room for other things. But even now, as I've already finished book two, thinking about book three, I'm like, maybe I should end book three this way instead, and leave room for a book four that deals with that. But I usually do not, in general, do not have a series out a plot for the series past the first book usually, and no later. No, I have no plot past the third book because you just never know what you're going to write in that second book. Like I said, you take, and like Josh said, you take all the good ideas that you can think of and you put as many of them as you can in the first book to grab everybody. Well, then you have to come up with new ideas for the second book, and maybe some of those new ideas are going to counteract where you thought you'd be going with the third book. So I feel like it's counterproductive for me to spend a lot of time writing a series, you know, plot outline when things might change very drastically after book one or book two.
If you
Well, and book one and book two might not sell, right?
right,
So if you're
where are you
writing a
going to go?
series towards that big idea and they don't sell, then you're either
But
just going to keep
I
writing book
always have to close it up. Even if book one and two didn't sell, I always got to put out like the third book and finish the arc.
for sure. But I'm saying if you've got this idea and you're like, I'm going to write this 7 book series or
Yeah,
6 book series or whatever to get to that idea, and then book one doesn't sell, then you're not going to get to that idea, or maybe you're not doing it for the money and you're just, writing to write, which is fine too. But if you're doing it to make a living and you write that first book banking on, this whatever big why or big how, and on book five, and then you don't ever get there, then book one doesn't matter. That's why I say like get
yeah.
that really, really good idea in book one and hook them. I want to say this real quick before you say, James, before I forget about it. A really good example of this is the Mistborn trilogy by Sanderson. Now, say what you want about his newer stuff, but the Mistborn trilogy, the ending of that book was just mind blowing. It was
Mhm.
amazing. And I did not read the second book on purpose because in my mind, I was like, there's no way he can top that book. There's no way. And then he did it again in book two, and then he did it again in book three. And uh, you you could very easily have taken a different route and saved what he did for book one to, say book three, but then book one wouldn't have been so good. It wouldn't have had that punch, and it wouldn't have had the impact that it did, and people might not have gone on to two or three. So anyway, go ahead, James. Sorry.
And that was one series that kind of counteracts the big twist at the end. Like that was a super cool twist that
Yes,
okay, now he's shifting all the rules he's set up. And then in
right.
book two, you get all this new information about the rules, which was
Yeah.
cool. So that's one, there's always a counterexample. But the only thing I was going to say there is like for me, one of the big lessons I've learned is that rather than focusing on, like, I do want to have cool things happen, but if you focus on a strong character who makes decisions for a reason and put them in hard situations, then the plot develops naturally. But like the story I'm working on right now, like which is loosely based on Operation Red Wing. Like I want to have like there will be a special operation against a mountain outpost. There will be a crash. The characters are going to have to respond to that.
There
And
will be blood.
there will be blood in certain ways. And it's just a matter of how we get there is what I'm like, the thing that's kind of fun in the middle. But I also like one of the challenges that I think is that, okay, how do I make all the steps to get up to that cool thing I wanted to write about also cool? And
Right.
it's where in the middle you have to spend some time. Like anytime I get to a point where I'm like, I'm not having fun writing this. Okay, it's time to rethink this. And are the characters really doing what they would do in this situation? Is it really making sense, or am I pushing them to do something just to get where I want to go, and that's I always want the ending to be a logical progression that the characters would make, not where I'm trying to push them into something that like if I've got them being stupid, so just so I can get to this situation, like that's not I mean, I do have one scene which I have the characters the hire makes them do a run through the middle of town, which is stupid. They all think it's stupid, but that's the kind of thing you do in the army. They make you do a run through the middle of town, and but it's like part of a counterpoint of where things are going to go eventually. But then at least you can have the characters respond to the stupid thing that their higher ups are making them do, uh, which was a big part of my military experience, at least.
100%.
Yeah,
One of the interesting things that I found about uh, loading in your great all of your great ideas is this is kind of a simple example, but let's just say the ending for your book that you're thinking of is since we're in mil sci-fi, somebody is getting rescued, right? Like a spec ops team or a fighter pilot, the ending that you have in mind is the rescue, and that's going to be the end of the book. And then you struggle through the entire book trying to fill it with good things, right? Like really interesting action sequences, or how do we get to the rescue, or whatever. This idea and something that you can kind of apply to all of your ideas is what happens if they get rescued in the middle and the rescue goes wrong. And now that really kind of amps up because you're building to this rescue. They get rescued, but then something goes wrong. The plane crashes or they get ambushed, something like that. And it just changes the way that you think about the book, because that one idea that you have could be interesting, but there's always a way to ramp that up and make it more interesting. And it goes back to the thing we've said multiple times. You put your characters in a tree, you set the tree on fire, you throw some rocks at them, and then a great tsunami comes and wipes everybody away. You rack up that tension, and if you're getting through that middle and you're running out of steam,
I
or you're
think the
running out
tsunami
of
is just
interesting
pushing it.
ways. No, you have to have the tsunami, Rick. But you get to the middle, the 30, 40,000 words that you're trying to fill page space with to get to that rescue. You're lost, or you don't have an idea. Try to push that ending to the middle. And then that ending, you don't have to do uh so much build up to get there. So you can take out some of those, whatever intermediate scenes that maybe aren't interesting or that you're having trouble coming up with. Get rid of all that, rescue them, and then make the plane crash. And now they have to, ramp it up even more.
yeah, that's a really
Um,
good point.
but
No, I was just going to say and when we talked about like putting all the cool ideas in the book, I think if you find yourself like, okay, incident is what makes it fun to read about, right? We want things to happen to these cool characters you've made up. So, uh, I just think that's an important thing. I see a lot of writers like they seem to be treading water, and the readers will see that too if you're treading water. So as soon as you think that's happening, yeah, that's a really good point. Push that ending up and come up with a better ending, or
Right.
whatever it was
Yeah.
you're working on there.
Yeah, I mean, because with the rescue example, they could still get you still have to rescue them, right? Like you still have that immediate goal of getting out of wherever you're going. Now it just adds an extra level of, just one time they don't live happily ever after. Now you got to figure out how to do it again, but differently, because now people know you're there, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
Um, the Another thing to think about too is uh, especially in the series and cliffhangers and twists, is does it make sense for the story to continue on from where it is, or does book two, like some in Rick's example, and then if you've ever read the Ember War, you'll feel me here that you in that first book, you in the conflict, and then you set up another one, another conflict. In I think it's Gardens of Nibiru in the Ember War. They succeed in what they're doing, and then in the last chapter, they get some message from someone, and that sets up, the events for the following book. And so you don't necessarily have to have a cliffhanger at the end of your book. As long as you wrap that story up and tell the audience, tell the reader, something else is going on and we've got to figure that out, then they're going to be interested in going to that next book and figuring out what the thing is, rather than getting through an entire book, not learning what they were trying to learn in the first place, and now being expected to go read a completely, 80,000 more words or whatever it is to figure out the why. That I find really frustrating.
Hmm. Yeah, you're asking a lot of them to stick with you if you're
Yeah.
Yeah.
doing that.
I was going to say that I was just rereading a series of mine recently. Um, it did not do well, and I find that even more depressing now after reading it because I really like writing it. But that's one of the few series where I did write a 3-book story arc in the beginning and totally threw it out after about midway through book 2. Just like, no, this is a better idea. So book 3 became something totally different. But it was one for Aethon. Like, it was called Gates of Eternity. It was a 3-book series: Gates of Hell, Gates of Hope, and Gates of Victory. And it was a what do you call that? Where there's portals, like kind of a Stargate-ish type deal.
Hmm.
Um, the alien. I mean, the United States government is experimenting on bits of a starship they found frozen under the ice in Antarctica. And
That's always smart to do.
yeah, well, they're trying to recreate the star drive that it used in this particle accelerator under, like, an underground particle accelerator in the desert in Nevada, and they wound up creating all these gateways to other worlds, and there's monsters and also people on their side through these gates. So uh, when I first started this, it was funny because Rhett, I think it was Rhett who came to me and said, "Hey, this audio company would like to do a 3-book series. If you can give them a series title and 3 book titles right now, we can sign this contract." So I just came up. I love Stargate, the series, and I'm like, I want to do something Stargate-ish. So I just came up with Gates of Hell. Sounded like a cool title, so like Gates of Hell, and then I came up with the rest of it. And I did come up with a plot right then, so they could give them a what do you call it, like a summary
Hmm.
Yeah.
of what the series would be about, and then got to the end of book 1, and I'm like, yeah, there's a couple things I want to change, and I'm getting in the middle of book 2, and I already got plotted out, and I'm like, oh yeah, that would be a much better idea. So the whole thing changed at book 3. So it's like you said, Josh, you get in there and you're like, if I do it the way that I originally planned, it's gonna be a little bit boring. There's gonna be too much filler. So I'll just bring all this stuff from book 3 into book 2 and come up with something totally different for book 3. And that happens a lot. And I think that's the secret to writing more compelling endings to your book and having a better plot and not having filler in it, is just take every good idea you've got and push it forward. If any books feels boring to you, just throw another idea in that you originally were going to save for another book.
Well, and that it comes back, I think all of us are pretty big outliners, at least for the most part, and able to be flexible with your outline and changing it
Right.
is really important, especially if you're trying like Rick, you're doing a 3 book series. If you had written that outline and then had married yourself to the outline and prevented yourself from changing what you were doing between book 2 and 3, um, one, you're potentially missing out on some really, really good ideas and elements to your story. But two, then you start to become frustrated with yourself, because we all know we write, hell, you write a chapter and you have an idea for the chapter, and by the end of the chapter, completely went another direction, and you had no
Me,
idea that it
me and
was.
my me and my outlines have an open marriage.
For sure. For 100%. Yeah. Um, yeah. And so if that happens in a chapter, of course it's going to happen in a book. And so you've got to be able to be kind of fluid with those outlines and ideas, because you're always going to have new ones. And sometimes the new ones are better. Um, Now, in my case, those new ones forced me to go and rewrite sections of my weaponized book so they would actually make sense.
Hmm.
And that kind of kicked me in the teeth a little bit. But in the end, it will be a better book. Uh,
Well,
but
that's one way
that,
to do it. If you have to go back and rewrite previous books or previous chapters, I think what I find more challenging, and maybe too challenging in some cases, is if you come up with an idea and it doesn't jibe with what you had in the previous book or the previous chapter, then you find a way that it always was leading that way anyway and makes
yeah,
sense. That I did that
right.
was Duty on Our Planet. I came up with something for book three in that was so totally different from anything I'd ever thought of. But the challenge was, and the really cool thing about doing it was, I had to make it fit in with all these threads that didn't really go anywhere from the first two books. And that was a lot of fun. Took a year and a half, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So maybe it would have been faster to go back and rewrite it, but
Well, I mean, some of those things you can do with a couple of sentences. If you've got to change something, some of those things can be really easily handled. The we talk about setup in the murky middle and stuff, and showing and not telling, and sometimes people get kind of carried away with the showing, when you could have just very easily said uh, a sentence. One of the one of the examples of this, I'm kind of paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly what he had, but it's a fight scene in The Gray Man, and he has a no, it wasn't. It was just now. It was recent. Orphan X, the latest Orphan X book. He's in this bar fight, and you knew kind of the lead up to this fight that he was going to have a fist fight with this sheriff, and the sheriff kind of sets his badge and his gun down, and he's like, "Oh, we're going to do this," and they have this brawl in the bar. And the fight's done, they break up, and then the next chapter, uh, Evan pulls out a phone, and it's the deputy's phone. And it's like a one line. He pulls out the phone. He grabbed it when he did this backflip of the character and pulled it out of his pocket. And he didn't show that in the fight scene. He just revealed it later. But just because of
I've
who the
always
character is.
I've always thought of showing not telling as more of a thing like when you say uh, Jim was an honest guy instead of having a scene in the book that shows he's an honest guy is what they mean by show don't tell. I mean, because if you can say Jim's an honest guy or Jim is has a hot temper, but if you have a scene where flies off the handle, then you everybody knows that without you telling them.
I think it could
Right.
be both.
Yeah, I think there's many layers to show don't tell, and maybe that could be a show in and of itself. But um, I was trying to use it as an example of like kind of the Deus Ex Machina problem that we run into sometimes with endings, where we don't know how to get to where we're going, and then bam, something just happens and it solves your problems. But a lot of it is natural. Like you pulled a cell phone that he stole from the guy. That's natural just because of who the character is, and that the reader knows that the character is resourceful like that. Not just that it was just some random event. But knowing that the character is resourceful like that, that's a showing, right? That he is resourceful, and so you don't
Yeah.
have to necessarily show that in the fight scene. Um,
It's also a thing where it
But
might have been awkward to actually describe that, so it's easier just to jump
right,
past it and oh, he did that, and now we can show him being competent with the phone, and it's a
yes,
showing of his spy skills or whatever.
yeah, exactly.
The one ending that I think about, which is not Mill SF, but is the things we've been talking about, where it's a first book that you weren't quite sure what was going to happen. And that's Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time and The Eye of the World. Like when he first sold that book, I think he had sold a trilogy at that point, but you can tell in reading the book that there probably was no guarantee it was going to move forward. And it's all moving up towards the big accomplishment, which is the Eye of the World. And it's a very obvious kind of false summit where they think they've solved a problem and yet it reveals and opens up the world. And I was thinking about that. Okay, I don't like twist endings, but I do like it when the characters think they've accomplished a problem. And this could happen a lot of times in MIL-SF where we think we've defeated the enemy in one way, but it turns out that was a feint, or that reveals some new technology that now we have to deal with. Or I think what often is unsatisfying to people though is if you end like if the last chapter or even like the last paragraph is all of a sudden some new thing appears that they haven't had a chance to deal with, then it's kind of like the reader really feels like you're just trying to sell me another book as opposed to I want to go get this
Right.
book.
100%. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
difference there. Yeah.
And that,
Um,
well, one to finish the thought, I think a lot of like to speak to the writers or even readers why they see this is unfortunately the way Amazon works now, and a lot of people have been told to serialize stories, or
Yeah.
you always got to find a way to hook somebody into the next book. I think people just take it a little too far, and they don't like they're really trying to force people into the next book as opposed to making them really want to know what's going to happen to those characters going forward.
I think the best way to get people to read the next book is to have a satisfying ending to the last book.
100%.
Because if you have a good ending in your book one, and you've built those characters up to the point where people are involved with them, they're going to want to know what happens next, and you don't have to leave a cliffhanger to get them to be interested in reading the next story.
Yeah.
So,
Rick, I'm
That goes a
looking at
lot of
I just want to mention, like, I guess I didn't realize about Gates of Eternity. And this is a cool series with great reviews. I'm like kind of, I'm
it
going to read it.
unfortunately did not do well,
Yeah.
not sell that well. I would have loved to have written more books in that. It involved more research than most of my books because it takes place in pretty much the present day and all around the earth. So I had to like research Romania and Poland and all these different places that they wind up fighting. But,
I mean, that could be another one for another day. And Josh, we definitely would like to hear your opinion on why some series sell and some don't. But
we'd like to hear your opinion on why my series failed, Josh.
I know.
yeah.
Well, I mean, even like,
Honestly, it like with everything, it doesn't necessarily a book or a series failing isn't indicative of that book or series being bad or poorly
right.
written. There's so many there's so many elements that go into whether a series is successful or not. I mean, we all know an author. She wrote a great book, and it just so happened that the week it launched, Amazon's algorithm died, and it froze, and it didn't sell. But the book is phenomenal. Battlefield
Battlefield.
Diplomacy. If you haven't read it,
By L.L.
it
Richmond.
is it is a really, really, really good book. But the algorithm just tripped up, and so it didn't sell as well as it should or could have. Um, but look at 50 Shades of Grey, right? That book is atrocious, and it
Porn
made
always sells.
a gazillion dollars, right? Um, I think too that if you're talking about satisfying endings, if you're talking about plot, that's one thing, but if you're talking about character, that's another. And if you have characters, um, specifically for what I'm thinking about right now is the how endings, where the characters are very almost like MacGyverish in how they solve the problem, and that is intriguing to the reader.
Does it have to involve a
Then
paperclip and bubble gum?
Absolutely always does. And
Okay.
duct tape.
Everything
But
involves duct
Solve
tape.
problems. Like the thing I think about is like, who is this person? Do I like them? Do they have cool tools that they use in a way that makes sense to me? And then are they in interesting situations that I want to see? I want to be with them as
Can
they
we
do it, you know?
can
yeah.
we talk real quick about series endings since we're talking endings?
Yeah,
Because
let's do it.
I felt there have been a lot of series that I've been really involved in and really looking forward to the ending where I've been let down. And I feel like it's even easier to write a bad ending in a series than it is a book. Um, Now, in trad publishing, sometimes that is not the fault of the author because sometimes the series is cut short before they intended to end it because the publisher says, it's not selling well enough, so we're ending it right here.
Yeah.
Right.
But indie books don't really have that excuse. Um, some people will stop writing a series when if it's not selling well, and they will not do the readers the courtesy of bringing that series to a satisfying ending first. Um, I feel like if the minimum you need to do in a series ending, whether you're ending it on where you thought you would or having to end it early, is to give each of the characters some kind of closure. Maybe not like the end of their story, but the end of this arc, the end of what they've been doing. So that you don't wind up with people saying like, well, does this guy go to jail? Did he live or die? Did this couple end up together? Or is there any hope? You know, there I don't like it when they I mean, it's one thing to have a story with the open-ended thing where you don't where the reader can decide what they think the person's going to do, like the end of Castaway, where you're standing at the crossroads. Um, but
Yeah.
it's another thing if they had ended Castaway uh, right after he left his ex fiance's house, you know, and didn't present him with that option of which way he's going to go.
Right.
You need to give him they didn't give him like an end to his story, but it showed that he had options and he was going to have to
Yeah.
decide what he's going to do with his life.
He's moving into a new world,
Yeah, he's
in a
moving
sense.
forward.
Right.
They didn't say did he go back to that woman's house with her package or did he you know go just go around the country with the money he'd gotten. But he had a lot. He knew he had a new life. So I think that's the minimum you can do with the characters in in the end of a series. You can't leave them hanging um, after you've dragged the audience along and invested them in these characters for 3 books or 4 books or 6 books. You have to give them um, at least a path forward that you can see where they're going. You don't have to end. You don't have to make them like in the perfect situation where it's happily ever after, but you have to say this is the way forward for this person, and this plot ended. This particular arc is over. The battle or the war or whatever came to a conclusion, and this is the way for this person here is getting out of the military and going back home maybe, and maybe his girlfriend will be waiting for him or not, but that's where he's headed. And this person here is going to be yes, you won't be. This person here is staying in the military even after the war and wants to be a senior officer. That's the life they want to live. That's the kind of you have to like tell people this is the direction they're heading in. And if you don't do that, if you ignore the character arcs that you've set up through all these books, then people are going to finish that series and say, I'm never reading anything by this guy again.
One of the things that I just thought of, Rick, when you were talking about that, and this kind of goes to my rescued example, and this is kind of my uh, delineation between book and series endings, where you're writing a series. Let's say it's a MIL-Sci-Fi series, because hey, and your idea is to get them rescued. The end of book one is them getting rescued. You don't have to have in book one, you don't have to have a drawn out resolution, the thing that Rick is talking about. The end of book one can be they get on the plane and they get
Yeah.
rescued, or they get home, right? That's the end of book one. But at the end of the series, you have to have the end to the book, the third book, whatever that ending is, and then you conclude or resolve any of the standing issues with the characters, or just say they got home and they lived happily ever after. One of it's kind of a twist, but not really. But an interesting thing you can do is you're writing a Mill sci-fi series, book one, they get rescued, whatever happens in book two, book three, or whatever. Let's say one of your characters is like he starts off book one and he wants to get out of the military and he's done he's done his years or whatever, and through the course of this book he does his duty and he's still kind of griping about it, and then you get to book three, and at the end of book three you have this battle and he realizes something about himself, and then that resolution for that character at the end of the series is re-enlisting.
Right.
And so he's spent, the whole series kind of against it. He has some kind of change in the third book. And then part of his resolution after the third book ends is he goes back and re-enlists. Or maybe, your character just wanted to get home and he gets home and he spends time there and then he goes back to do his duty. There's things that you can do with the characters really specifically in the resolution phase of a series that need to happen after the quote unquote book three ending, but you can use all of those books to tie in the character. It doesn't just, the resolution for that character doesn't have to be specific to the third book. It can be specific to the series. And like Rick's saying, you give them an option, you put them at a crossroads, and it's not a cliffhanger crossroads because we don't know whether or not they're getting rescued. We don't know whether or not they're going to succeed with whatever they're doing in book three. It's just we're done with that now, and now what? And if he's in the military, it could be as thing as getting a call and it's time for the next mission or whatever, and that's not
I think
necessarily a cliffhanger. It doesn't have to even lead into a fourth book. That can just be he's back to his regular life. His regular life happens to be going on missions, and now it's on to the next one. And that, even though it kind of seems like a cliffhanger, it's not. It's a resolution saying the character is still pressing forward. He's still doing what he needs to do.
MILSF, I think, has, and you're right, if you're doing that kind of flat arc within, episodic, but MILSF gives you some really great shortcuts too, like you're saying, re-enlistment, like an awards ceremony or memorial
Yeah.
ceremony, TDY, or it's time to move stations. Those are things that for this audience, for our audience and us specifically, it's just kind of a shortcut to re-enlisting is a major emotional event, and
Yeah.
like all of us know the guy that was like, screw this, I'm never doing it again. And then something happens, kid number three comes along, or, Jody shows up and he gets divorced and, oh, guess I'm sticking around, and so those
Yeah.
are things that you can play with.
I've
I think.
always thought a great ending for a military sci-fi series, and I haven't used it, but
Mhm.
I've thought about this is sort of like a take on what what's his name did in The Martian. Who wrote The Martian?
Andy Ware.
Andy Weir.
Andy Weir, where um, Mark Watney gets back, and he spent all this time, and you wonder what he's going to do with his life, and he goes and teaches other astronauts.
Yeah.
And I always thought that'd be a cool thing for a military science fiction ending for a series where you have the main character, go be a instructor somewhere and teach people everything he's learned and all this stuff that's happened in the
Because
series.
then later you can do Top Gun Maverick, and you can have
Yeah, there you go.
sensei comes out of retirement to train the next, generation
I
of
just
sound.
watched that night before last, and then Val Kilmer
Uh,
died yesterday, and I'm like, wow.
yeah.
One of the things I think that is kind of missed in series resolutions is the opportunities to make it like way more impactful. Like Rick saying, becoming an instructor, right? Um, you can layer that and have him, if he's not experienced in survival or whatever, and then he's got to survive somewhere. Now he's going to go teach survival, right? And you kind of layer it and make it a little impactful in ways that the character started the series not knowing something. Now he knows something, and he's determined now to make sure that other people know this thing so that they don't fall into the same trap or circumstance that he did. I think that's a great idea, Rick. I would love to read an ending where you do
Maybe someday.
that.
Rick has the challenges laid down.
If I
So
ever have
The thing
time
about
to
endings
start
is
another
that
series, I'll do it.
there's so many ending ideas that you come up with, and so many different ways to do it. Um, Being open to changing it and being open to kind of play around with it, especially if you're ending a series and you love these characters and you necessarily don't want to end it, but maybe you are or whatever. Just think of like not necessarily what you would like to see, but what the character would like to see. And if you're thinking in terms of what the character wants, then you're probably not going to go wrong. You know what I mean?
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the problem, honestly, with then this is like first world problem type deal, but with success, when you write a series and you only intend it to be so long and it does
Mhm.
really well, and then you have to go beyond what you thought it was going to be, then that satisfying ending you had in mind is like, oh, they can't get out of the military yet, or they can't go do this yet because they have to still do more stuff because people want to read this. That makes ending it harder.
I That's one of the reasons why I've tried to think of my endings for Weaponized as kind of just episodic to the book, and then trying to not have a long running series arc because I can stop the book at book three and have it be satisfying and wrap up everything. And if people like the characters, then it makes sense to just do something brand new in book four. And um, it's not they're not in a military unit as the books progress, so it kind of gives me a little bit more flexibility. Um, but a great way to uh, change up an ending is like you said, James, transfer. Um, you change ships or you even change branches or something like that, and it allows you to go different places with a character. And if you're going to do that, just make sure that you're setting it up in the book so that it makes sense when it happens. If you're going to have the character, change ships or even change branches. It probably change branches would probably be the more difficult one to do. You've got to kind of figure out a way to set that up in the beginning of the series or the beginning of the book or whatever. And that way, when it happens, it's not just out of nowhere. Why he was in the Navy? Why is he in the Air Force now? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
I'm thinking about the instructor from Starship Troopers where he manages to get himself busted back down to private, and that's
Right,
a way to nerf your character. Like he was in the Marines and now he's going to the Army and he's got to transfer as a PFC or whatever, you know.
right.
So, so all right. Well, I think this has been a really interesting conversation, and we'd love to hear what endings you have loved and maybe the ones that did not work out or were unsatisfying and why you think that was. Because that's always,
And why Josh is not satisfied with the ending of the was it the Dark Tower
oh
gunslinger?
yeah,
Oh
well
yeah.
that's its own category of
Oh, oh, oh. Ah, do not erase your villains with an eraser. That's all I'm going to say.
right. Don't write yourself into the story. Maybe that's it.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Stephen King's its own
Uh,
category.
I wrote down on a note. Maybe we could talk about it in planning for the next show. But maybe a good topic for another show would be show don't tell and
Yeah,
kind of the different layers or the different ways to do that. That might be an interesting conversation.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with us and check us out in Discord or I honestly haven't looked at the Facebook group in a while because I'm sick of Facebook. But there's Facebook, there's a Facebook group too. If you want to talk to me, I'll be in Discord. And yeah, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time. Later.